I've said before, I do not cover culture war stuff because, quite frankly, it's pointless. Very often, it's a meaningless discussion that does not lead to any direct policy engagement. And at the end of the day, when you're talking about politics, policy is like your meat and potatoes of this. Culture war stuff doesn't even come into your meal. Essentially, it's like, asking for some sort of condiment or dressing to put on your meal, and it's empty. That's it. It's an empty salt shake, or it's an empty ketchup bottle. That's how it works, and that's effectively what the culture wars are. They are a distraction from the real issues, which is the meat and potatoes, which again is what you want if you are engaged in politics. You know that if you want to get full on politics, then you've got to really dig into your meat and potatoes and your policy to help, affect and see the change of what's going to happen in your country. Now, recently, the Tories did an education report. And, of course, in this education report, they decided that they would say that the education system has failed the white working class of this country because apparently teachers are too focused on a system of teaching white privilege. Now, of course, this report does not point to any examples or any lesson plans where teachers are, quote, teaching white privilege. Like I say, I've said before, I know people who are teachers, and if you ask them, what if a parent came to you and said, stop teaching my child white privilege, they'd laugh in their face. They're too busy preparing their kids because they're being tested so much. They've been made to to tick boxes to make sure that they can pass at least a certain amount of their kids to pass the next exam. They're far too busy worrying about that, and even themselves being unable to teach big class sizes because of austerity. Austerity has damaged our educational system beyond far more words. And if the Tories were serious about a levelling up agenda and all of a sudden helping this white working class minority, and again, it's not the white working class minority here, it's all children from disadvantaged backgrounds that have been affected by these cuts, because remember, it was the Tories who specifically cut the education budget, which directly led to these failings that they are so worried about today. And again, they're trying to change history. They're trying to obfuscate the issue and say it's not our fault that kids aren't learning. It's not our fault that we cut the budget. It's teaching this woke nonsense. Again, couldn't be further from the truth. So before we do get into this issue, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button, and of course down below there are links to my Patreon page as well as a link to a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much for all those people who support me, and on with the show. So this comes from The Guardian. The title is "The Tories' Education Report is an Exercise in Blame Shifting. The Culprit is Austerity." It's easy to forget how very short childhood actually is. Actually, it's not easy. If you spend any time around children, then that's all you tend to think about. But let's recap from the Conservative-led Commons Education Committee, which this morning published its report called "The Forgotten: How the White Working Class Pupils Have Been Let Down and How to Change It." An underperforming child in Year 7 today, whatever their race, has not been let down by decades of underfunding. They've been let down by 11 years of underfunding, the length of their life, and a Year 12 kid whose journey through school has been marked by food insecurity, food banks at home, breakfast club co-delivered by charities, free school meals, but only in term time, wouldn't be able to trace the roots of that back to any Labour administration. In 2010 to 2011, as Gordon Brown ceded government to Cameron and his ostentarians, as we used to call them, the 61,000 emergency parcels were delivered by a single food bank. the Trussell Trust. Those numbered was considered a scandal at the time, but being unscandalised on accountability just didn't stop them climbing. And in 2019 to 2010, it reached a staggering 1.9 billion just from that one trust alone. There is simply no observable mechanism by which a primary school pupil could be bearing the brunt of a government policy devised before 2010, unless succeeding governments had left those policies unchanged. And much is obvious, yet faced with an avalanche of misinformation, you have to grab onto the truth like a tree root. It was quite chilling to hear how the Conservative MP, Rob Halfordham, defended the Education Committee report on the Today programme on Tuesday when he described the stagnant spending under Labour, only partially restored by the generosity under the coalition of the Conservatives, what was the direct opposite of the truth. To recap, child poverty fell significantly between 1997 and 2010, in which it was a focal point of government efforts and rhetoric. And since 2010, cuts affecting children have been so swinging and so wide range and so short-sighted and so interconnected that they often look like deliberate acts of cruelty. Children were hit so universally by cuts to schools, healthcare, local authorities, and particularly by cuts to targeted services. Small kids were affected by the closure of over 1,000 child centres. Teens were affected by cuts to youth services and mental health provisions and in the education maintenance allowance. These are all already were already in financially precarious households. They were hit the hardest by cuts to the disability benefits and the notorious two-child welfare cap. These cuts to tax credits for parents on low incomes and even benefit sanctions. By 2017, over 4 million children were living in poverty. Two-thirds of them in working households. The same year, 355,000 kids were classified as destitute. Again, this much we know, and again, I'm reaching feverishly for some stable reality. The Conservatives have always operated in bad faith, preaching a care game and commenting while knowingly meting out real hardships. But this report jumps into the complete realm of fantasy. Our underperforming youth, we learn, are victims of a narrative of white privilege. The white working class have been, quote, neglected, swept under the carpet, and white working class kids of every other ethnicity have been supported by an industry of liberal do-gooders, one supposes, absent that of the additional and indefinable support, while white disadvantaged children are both left behind and choked in indignation at being told about their own privilege when their lived reality is the opposite. Never mind that it was the Conservatives that have been in power for twice as long as the phrase white privilege has even been in common usage. Never mind that nobody in education would recognise this picture, that their support has been reserved for Black, African, and Middle East students. That's how you say it. The BAME students. I can't remember what the acronym is now. The argument is in the fundamentals. Is in the confection. There is no such thing as a, quote, white working class. It is a taxonomy meaningless. If class connotes anything, it is a set of shared structural conditions. There isn't within the working class a subset of white people whose conditions are different to those people who are not white. It has been more descriptively clarity than saying the white working class, although the juxtaposition does remind us of a very racist cross-current in the middle class, and white is implied. Politically, though, this phrase is heavily laden with meaning, deployed to the greatest effect over Brexit and since, but in use for some years before that. As the author Richard Seymour describes Brexit and the white working class, the word white does a lot of the heavy lifting, stripping the phrase working class of its militant leftist organisation connotations, and is refashioned as a social grouping, not as class combatants, but as a conformist sediment of traditionalist, respectful and societal norms. As a voting bloc, they could easily and reliably be whipped into a fury by immigration. And here it turned out the phrase working class remained readily useful and even deluded of its definition, since it is left to disagree with the white working class opinion, became a de facto snobbish and elite. In short, it was strategically misapplied to dress up the aggressive ethno-nationalism that has resonated the voice of power to the dispossessed. It ought to be laughable and try to tug on this very cheap polyester disguise over education to try and explain the shortfalls in attainment in yet another conspiracy of the liberal elite, hell-bent on stripping the white working class of its dignity. Yet the Conservatives say it with a straight face, irresistibly, though their back-to-front argument draws our attention to the staggering losses caused by austerity upon years of childhood, voided by the delight, by the spectre of destitution. And it stays to say, none of us are laughing. And that is the spin the Conservatives are putting on this report. Because it was austerity. It was them who voted continuously for cuts that have affected children so much. And yet, it was the Labour government between 1997 and 2010 who directly said that we will tackle child poverty. And guess what? Child poverty went down. And since they came into power in 2010, it's gone up dramatically. I mean, what was it? The Trussell Trust. So at the time, one trust delivered 61,000 emergency parcels, and that was considered a scandal. Now, this one charity today, as its numbers, delivers, where is it? Now delivers. So that was back in 2010, that was considered a scandal upon the Labour government. Now that one trust delivers 1.9 million parcels. The Conservatives can blame Labour as much as they want, but they cannot anymore. The idea that is an acceptable argument is ridiculous, because they are the ones who have continuously cut into so many programs, targeted programs that would help these children that supposedly they now care about so much. Again, it's trying to deploy a smokescreen to try and distract from the fact that the reason why, poor children from disadvantaged backgrounds are failing so much in education is because the Tories have taken away everything from them. And that is the real scandal. And the fact that the Tories are trying to desperately hide this is not funny. And it should be seen as laughable and completely for what it is. This is what the culture war will try and hide. The real life implications, and especially in education, where children from all disadvantaged backgrounds, from the working class, have been systematically targeted by austerity, which we know more is coming down the road. Because Rishi Sunak's already put it in his budget. There's an 8% cut happening across all departments. So we know this situation is going to get even worse. And they can blame it on being this, as it was described in that stupid report, of a liberal elite trying to... Why would... The left likes education. We want more people to be educated. Why would we be wanting to damage education? That doesn't make sense. But there you go. It's very unfortunate, and the fact that if anyone even tries to think that, it's Tony Blair and Gordon Brown that are to blame for all this education failings, well, you've been in power long enough to be able to affect some serious change, to a change that at least we should start to be seeing get better. If it's not, it's only gotten worse. And your answer to those solutions was to take away money from these disadvantaged children backgrounds. And that should not be applauded. It should be treated as what it is, one of the biggest scandals of this government's tenure. And another example of why they should be booted out of government as quickly as possible, and why they should never be allowed near the reins of government ever again. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit the like, share and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, we'll see you all next time.